Hello, I'm Lauren Haldeman, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Nutrition Education and Behavior, where we are advancing research, practice, and policy. And each month we select an article to feature as a press release with an accompanying podcast. And today's podcast article can be read in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months. And today I'm really happy to be speaking with Dr. Julie Wood, who is the corresponding author for the article titled The Suitability, Readability, and Accuracy of Food Security Resources for Refugees Resettling in Australia. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today. Julie, can you talk a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much, Lauren. So my name's Julie Marie Wood, and I'm a researcher based in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. I have just finished my PhD, so I had a long career in first communications and economics, then retrained in health. So I had a long career in health, worked as a health communicator and clinically in health. Now I've just finished my PhD, which focuses on food insecurity among refugee populations, particularly those populations that are resettling in high-income countries, and looking at the challenges they face in finding the food that they need in the new food environment.
Well, before we get going, I'm going to say congratulations on completing your PhD. That's very exciting. So I'm very happy for you.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. And so let's get right into the paper. Can you give us a brief overview of the paper, including what you did, as well as the results?
Sure. So the paper was focused on information resources, which was kind of a different angle to take on food insecurity. But coming from a comms background, I did right at the beginning of my PhD, I did a scoping review looking at the last 20 years, what's happened in refugee food insecurity. And as I was doing that study, I found that Australia has actually significantly invested in information resources over those 20 years. But the resources were scattered, they were hidden, they were archived. And I just thought, this is an existing asset that we have. We don't know how big, what the population looks like, and we don't know the value of these resources. And I thought, I knew that research had indicated that information landscapes are fractured for refugee people living as refugees. They need access to good, solid, accurate information for successful settlement, including food environment information. And I know from other studies that that's what they want. They're looking for that information. I thought, we've got those assets. They're hidden. Are they valuable to us? And so I designed this study to do with the research team, designed this study to do a content analysis, summative content analysis of all of the resources. We did a national search, which ended up being a mammoth search with a big, we wanted it to be really rigorous, so there was some really solid methodology behind that. We searched for 4 months and ended up with over 600 different resources. When we refined that down, screened them all for just being food security related resources, we ended up with around 180 resources, 184 resources. We screened those and we found the 3 questions we were asking: are they suitable, are they accurate, and are they readable? So overwhelmingly, they were suitable and accurate. But the readability was the fatal flaw in them. So around 96% of them were above the recommended readability thresholds for people living as refugees. I just want to acknowledge there that people living as refugees are individuals with their own strengths and skills. They have varying literacy levels, but just ensuring that all people that are living as refugees can access the resources, they set at certain parameters to say, keep them within this literacy range. And 96% of the resources were above that literacy range. So we questioned, are they really suitable? If people can't read them and comprehend them, are they really suitable and are they usable for people? So that was a really big question that came out of the study for us. Other things that we found in our results that were interesting was that over half of the resources were all text. So they were just words crammed onto a page, which is tough going for anyone, particularly if your literacy is challenged. Less than a third scored well for cultural appropriateness, so they didn't have any cultural adaptation. And nearly 70% of them were 5 years or older or didn't have a date on them. And I thought we kind of need to do better than that. We need to have a date to make sure that it's within current guidelines, particularly if it's health information, that it is appropriate and accurate for now. And accessing the resources was really hard. We're a trained research team. It took us 3 months. And forensically searching for these resources, they need to be easier to find, or we can't use them. They are a bit of a sleeping giant, depending on their value. So another thing we found from a comms point of view that was a bit of a challenge in terms of using them was that 90% of them had no summary. So they were all text, and then there was no summary. And we all like a bit of a summary because you can read it and get the full, bullet points of the key points that you need to take out of there. And with people maybe in a second language, a different culture, and a challenging environment, it needs to be easy information to understand, absorb, and use. So we identified some key challenges. There's a big population of resources out there, and there's some wonderful things about the resources, but there's also some areas that we really need to address to ensure that we can help the agency access and utilisation, those factors away from the structural barriers of food insecurity, help people living as refugees to address some of the things that are within their control to access the food that is culturally appropriate for them.
Sure. So, want to ask, you said that it was quite an undertaking to find the resources. Can you just talk a little bit about where you found the resources? Where were they located?
Lauren, they were all over the place. Some of them were archived. Like I found quite a few on council. So we have councils, and I think in other high-income countries that might be counties, or in England it would be counties. Perhaps in the States it's counties too. So it's a local governing authority. In Australia they're called councils, or local government authorities. And I found quite a few at the local level, so on council websites. I found some on the Department of Immigration sites, so the more federal sites, national sites. I found some as part of decks that public health nutritionists had posted onto resource platforms, and others, 2 states or 2 counties in Australia have done health translations or multicultural resource sites. And so I found them within those sites, sometimes embedded within those sites. And then we screened them all to make sure that they were food security related.
You did quite a search, for sure. So you had some very interesting findings. What are some of the key implications for this work?
So there were 4 really key implications that came out of it, and they came under 4 headings. So access, range, methodology, and food acculturation. So the first one, access, was a really big one. So I said earlier that they're hard to access in terms of readability, so accessibility, and hard to access in terms of locating them because they were all over the place. So first implication is that we need to improve access in terms of readability and comprehensibility, and access in terms of being able to easily locate them. The second one is range. We found some really big gaps in range and some duplication too. So there were a lot of resources on lunchboxes, which are a big thing in Australian food culture, lunchboxes at school, because we don't have universal school meals. So there were a lot of resources on that, and then other resources such as keeping food safe in a fridge or how to use a microwave, which are all new food environment things. There were barely any resources. We think that might have been associated with people not being able to find what's currently available, and so they're duplicating, which is unfortunately investing in the same thing we already have. So there's lots of areas of range where we need to, topics that we need to top up on in terms of navigating the new food environment. The third one, methodology. Coming out from this, looking, yes, they're suitable and accurate, but are they really suitable when we can't read them or their literacy isn't taken into account? So in terms of methodology going forward, it would be really good to consider weighting readability and comprehensibility, and weighting cultural appropriateness, because we had a lot of discussions around if a resource is culturally inappropriate, should we test it any further? or should that be a barrier? If it's culturally inappropriate, actually it's just unsuitable, and why further test it? But at the moment, the validated tools aren't weighted in those areas. We think it would be great to perhaps consider weighting them for multicultural studies. And the last area, food acculturation, this was looking at Berry's model of acculturation. So those 4 quadrants: integration, separation, assimilation, and marginalisation. The current information resources that we have about the high income country food culture, they look at assimilation, which is how can you come and settle in Australia in this instance and assimilate to our food culture? These are our public health nutrition frameworks. These are our guidelines. This is how you do it in Australia. Well, that's not really the way, because people are bringing beautiful food cultures with them. So it would be great if the resources could shift their focus a little bit using that Berry's model of acculturation and go more into that integration area where that beautiful incoming food culture, we can look at that in resources and say, okay, how can we keep the beauty of your food culture, but also look at what's rich in the Australian food culture, and perhaps even substituting some of the ingredients that you can't get, but you'd still call home or nourishing to you. How can you do that in the Australian food environment? I would love to see that shift, because it speaks about more than nutrition, doesn't it? It's about home and nourishment and heart. Yeah. So they're the 4 key areas. You can tell I really love this study, even though it really hurt me doing this study.
I can tell by seeing the big smile on your face too. And I absolutely love how you talk about the beautiful incoming food culture and how you can integrate that with the Australian food culture. What a wonderful model. Now you've mentioned some very big important implications of this work. So what are your next steps, or what are the next steps that are required to ensure that these migrant populations are receiving or have the resources to help them with food insecurity challenges?
So one really big one, I'm a very pragmatic researcher. One really big one that I identified in our study that was as an example of a high income country, so this was set in Australia. We have already a lot of settlement programs and infrastructure and touch points where people living as refugees come in, and they are served by the Refugee Health Service and caseworkers. We have a lot of touch points like that where during my PhD, I studied those touch points, and there are very few resources in there about how to shop for food in Australia, how to get to the shops, how to navigate the food environment. There's some really fantastic infrastructure already there. It would be great to get these resources into that infrastructure. So it's already existing. Let's get the resources and the information in there. That would be a great next step. The 2 primary areas I think for next steps are improving that access, so that integrating information into the existing programs and engagement points, centralising resources so they're easy to find. So I would love to have a website, an online resource that is just nutrition and food related for migrant and refugee populations. So they could go in there, or settlement workers or dietitians could go in there and find what they need easily. And in future resource development, using co-design and lived experience. So hearing the voices from people in those communities rather than us as cultural outsiders, listening to the experience of those people and putting that into our public health nutrition minds and going, okay, how can we best adapt this so it truly reflects the needs of those populations? And the second area is increasing that range. So minimising duplication, gathering resources from other high-income countries, so England, Canada, the United Kingdom, England, Canada, the United States. What wonderful resources does everyone else have? Assessing them and perhaps pooling them, because we know from the literature that there's a lot of common challenges for people living as refugees across other high-income countries. That would really help to scale the resources quickly. And the final point on increasing range would be focusing on literacy. So making sure that we're doing some easy read resources, some visual only resources, and then some text-based resources for other people who have had access to education during their pre-settlement pathway and they're highly literate and they're looking for more information. So I packed a lot into that little answer there, but there's so
You
much to
certainly
do.
did. You certainly did, and it sounds like you've got your work cut out for you. Thanks very much, Julie, for doing this very important work and for spending this time with me. I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
So there's two other things I'd like to mention. One is that I'd like to absolutely acknowledge the rest of the research team. So that's Dr. Emily Dennis, Dr. Rebecca Lindberg, Dr. Claire Margerison, and Associate Professor Alison Booth. Fantastic research team, wonderful people. And I'd like to thank you. I'd like to really thank you for acknowledging this work. And unfortunately, as my PhD progressed, this work became more relevant, which I'm sad to see that that's happened. People know what food security is now, and we see refugee issues across all the news. I'm really chuffed that you picked this to speak about, and it just amplifies that message and gets it out there how important it is for people to be able to find food in their home.
And I agree. Thanks so much, Julie. And to all of our listeners, remember, you can read this article in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months.